Hey, TC family, Curtis Miller here, looking forward to another great time to just talk brain health. This is the third of our fourth chats that we're doing. And so many of you have been on here participating, getting in on the conversation, and sharing just how they've been so impactful on you. We're talking brain health because we really believe God made our brains. He cares about us and our brains, and He cares, and so we care about us and our brains, and we want to love and value people well. We believe that hope and healing have a name. That name is Jesus. And so we also believe that Jesus has created some amazing people with amazing gifts to deliver that hope and healing. And so one of them is with us here today, Jonathan Hetterly. He is a licensed counselor at Southeast Psych. I think you guys have multiple locations around Charlotte. You work in the areas of anxiety, depression, addiction, leadership, life transitions, family. Did I miss anything?
I do a little bit of everything and a whole lot of nothing, probably. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Right on. Well, tell me a little bit about how you stepped into this career path.
Sure. Well, I actually, right out of college, started in the area of youth ministry. So I've always had a heart of helping people. But what tended to start happen was a lot of people that I really cared for and worked with started to face a lot of life turmoil. And, in my role as a youth pastor, I was able to provide support and care, but there would come a point where it just was not appropriate or ethical for me to tackle some of the struggles that they were facing. And I realized over time that I really felt like that's where I needed to be. I needed to be on that other side of that line where I could provide emotional, psychological, mental health care and support. And so that really kind of compelled me to go back to school and get a degree in counseling so that really can just walk one-on-one with folks and really meet them in a very vulnerable and sometimes really just scary place to let them know that they're not alone and hopefully allow a lot of growth and progress to happen.
That's really cool. I appreciate you sharing that because I think people arrive at different places in so many different ways. God has a path orchestrated for each one of us, and I think about my parents' generation. A lot of them jumped into a career. They were there, and they saw it to fruition for a lifetime. And the Lord just does so much to prepare along the way to put us in spaces that really just utilize that gift and even introduce us to things that we're like, I would have never signed up for that early on. So that's cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I know that right now we really are in a time unlike any other in our generation. This time of social distancing, it's impacted people in a host of ways. Before we go right into specifics, how has this time impacted you personally?
Well, I think I'm kind of dealing with it maybe in the same way that a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are experiencing. There's some advantages. There's some benefits that I've actually experienced through this time of social quarantine. And there's certainly some drawbacks or struggles or stressors. Obviously, I'm around my family a lot more. So we're all, our schedules are not just, we all sort of scatter in our own directions. In a lot of ways, I have more time, just the amount of time that I might spend in the car going to the office. There's been a lot of emphasis or promotion on self-care and well-being. So I'm eating out a lot less. So my diet has greatly improved. I have a lot more opportunity to exercise or do yoga, something that in the busyness of everyday American life sometimes can get crowded out. And then in some ways, appreciation and gratitude for those small things, the small things that it's easy to overlook on day-to-day life. I think those are some of the things that I've really benefited from. Obviously, some of the drawbacks is, your family, my spouse, my daughters, they're not really meant to meet all of my relational needs and wants. And so that can put a lot of pressure on a family unit when we feel a little cut off or more isolated from friendships and colleagues, things of that nature. A lot of things right now take more effort. So even though we may have more time, we may find ourselves at the end of the day being really exhausted and not necessarily understand like why I really haven't been doing much. That may be the narrative in our own head. But because our schedules and routines are so disrupted, we have to put a lot more active thinking in everything we do. And we tend to have to make a lot more choices throughout the day, which
Yeah.
really can lead to a lot of mental fatigue over time. So, and I've faced that myself. It's just, you feel a little bit kind of numb and worn down, and yet it doesn't always match up with this recognition of, but I have more time. I have more time.
Right.
Well, shouldn't I be more energized? I think that's certainly one of the drawbacks or challenges. And then obviously, I think everybody probably has somebody that they know, that they love or care, that's going through some tremendous stress right now, whether it's their job security. Maybe they've lost their job. Maybe they or someone that they know and love has health issues, and they're really concerned about the possibility of them getting COVID, or somebody that you know and love already has. And that can be tremendously scary, since all of this is so new to us. We don't have a lot of life experience that we can sort of bounce off this narrative of like, everything's going to be okay, or this is what happened when we faced this last time. It's likely going to play out this way. So many things that are unknown. And we don't tend to operate very well with the unknown, because knowledge is one of the ways we feel in control and capable. And so that's really stressing a lot of people out, myself included. I'm only human, despite my profession is like, I struggle with the unknown and what I can't predict. And I think all of us are really having that tug of war of like, how to not let our mind take us to worst case scenarios and live in fear.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Man, you hit on like a ton of great things in there that I think a lot of people are processing. They really are. They're seeing things about relationships. And, I think one of the things we've talked about with TC and with our staff is just not running from those things, but in some instance, in some way, pressing in a little bit to allow God to kind of do some things in us, in our thoughts, in those relationships. What has been some of your, I guess, maybe just the way you've kind of coped, or even taken when you recognize, hey, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be? What has been some of your kind of action steps in that?
Sure. Well, both with the folks that I work with in a individual setting, and then throughout the community with giving talks or just connecting with other people, I've really emphasized this is a time of great compassion, self-compassion and compassion for other people, because we just we're kind of making this up as we go. We're having to figure things out. We're having to figure out how our stress responds and how we externalize it during this time. We're having to see, when you're around your kids nonstop or your spouse all the time, what are those things that starts to bother you or irritate you in a way that 2-3 months ago you knew that bothered you, but it was just easy to overlook or dismiss because we recognize that we're flawed and imperfect humans.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I've really challenged folks is that we really need to increase our self-compassion, because everybody is stressed and struggling in some ways. We all oftentimes are just so consumed on how we're doing and what needs to be done on our side that it can be really easy to lose empathy that other people are struggling. And we tend to make judgments and conclusions on what we see. And there's so much we don't know of what's going on in someone's life and how they're struggling on the inside. So if we just make assumptions and judgments based upon behaviors, it can be, we can really lose sight of people are struggling, they're stressed, they might not be sleeping well, they may not be eating well, they may be worried for other people. And so really leading by love and kindness is a good starting point. And doing that for myself, because I've really had to adjust my expectations and boundaries in some ways as well. As so what I might assume was healthy living for me a few months ago has to be adjusted now.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like, we know the world is under great stress. So if I'm having a night where I don't get great sleep, number one, it's really easy to just immediately jump into problem solving. Like, what do I got to do? What do I need to do to fix this? And if we step back with a little bit of self-compassion and self-awareness, recognize like, well, of course I might be struggling with sleep. There's so many things that I'm worried about, not just for myself, but for other people. And there's so many people that are looking to me for some type of guidance, answers, or support. And I have to be very honest and humble that I don't know. And so in a lot of ways, it's really helping others and help myself of like, how do you tolerate the unknown, but not live in fear, not
Yeah.
go down that really dark path where we lose hope, we lose a sense of empowerment and that we have influence in this life. But we have to adjust that because the world is changed, and how I would kind of go about my work professionally and then my self-care just several months ago, it has to adapt. We have to be able to adapt to these changing times.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. TC, we talk about it all the time. Jesus gave that great commandment of love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I think there's a period of time where people thought love yourself was selfish. And we've I think we're starting to really understand, first and foremost, we need to be able to have a correct view of God and how he loves us, and being able to see that then enables us to love ourselves well and love ourselves correctly, so that we can really love people outwardly. And I appreciate you saying that, because I think it is important that we take that time, and there is some introspection, there is some taking time to process some things. There is making sure that we're getting good rest and we're being real about our thoughts and our feelings, and all of those sorts of things. Right now, in this time of, like, you're home and you're there with your family. Some people are maybe more in isolation. Some people are in settings that maybe aren't healthy, and they're trying to figure out how to do this. What would you suggest as far as just even being able to process some of these things? What are some go-tos? What are some ways to really think about how to do that well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge in quote unquote normal times, whatever that means, but
Yeah.
certainly in times of great uncertainty and great stress, feeling connected with others and having hope and knowing that you're loved and cared for and cared about is tremendously important. You know, probably about the last 5 or 10 years with the onset of social media and just the online life, so much research was starting to come about isolation and loneliness. And there's just a lot of data that says loneliness kills,
Hmm.
isolation kills. Now we're in this really interesting time right now because technology is actually one of the ways we're staying connected to other people right now in a manner which a year or two ago we were looking at, is this compelling people to isolate and withdraw away from people? So this is a very unique and interesting time, but
Hmm.
the bottom line is that we need to be in relationship and we need to be connected for our mental, emotional, spiritual well-being and health. One of the challenges is that if somebody is really down, whether they're depressed, they feel lonely, they're really helpless or hopeless, it's a lot for someone to, in that state, to reach out and ask for help. Some
Hmm.
people are able to do that in moments of great courage or desperation, but that's a lot to ask from somebody that's already struggling. So if we look at this from a community standpoint, it's about me thinking of who do I know that could be lonely, that could be really self-isolating and withdrawing, who maybe is under great stress and duress, maybe already had some relationship challenges or issues going on in their life. Can I come up with anybody that meets that criteria? And if I can, then from a community and relational standpoint, it's really about compelling myself to reach out to them and not wait for them to reach out to me.
Hmm.
So many people right now are struggling and they're waiting for somebody to reach out to them, and they don't have that mental emotional energy or that belief in themselves that if I reach out to somebody, they're going to care. I actually worked with one of my clients here at the start of this, and we were just kind of talking about how the social quarantine was impacting him. And he talked about how he hadn't talked to anyone outside of his family for the entire time that he'd been, out of school and doing online school. And this guy is an introvert, but we talked about like, well, why didn't we reach out? And he was like, because I'm just afraid people will find me annoying. Like that
Hmm.
they'll say, why is he reaching out to me? And I said, well, if somebody reached out to you, is that the first thing that you would think? And he'd say, no, I think that they obviously cared about me if someone reached out. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes when we're in isolation, when we're alone, one of the biggest barriers is our own negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Those really distorted beliefs that we're unlovable, people don't love us, people don't like us, people don't want to hear from us. And we need other people to oftentimes challenge and dispute when our mind and our thoughts are our own worst enemy when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to being isolated or withdrawn or alone.
Yeah, I know, we say it all the time. Pastor Derwin kind of brings it back to our thought process that the scene of the crime is your mind.
Yeah.
And I think about it, you mentioned this, the importance of not being isolated. God's created us to be a family. He's created us to be in community. He's created us to be in relationship with one another. I think that the enemy, the devil, really likes to try and get us in spaces where we're there with our thoughts and we're there by ourselves, and we're having that hard time to really speak truth into our life. It's almost like we're living in a make-believe place
Mm.
of these thoughts that we can't find a root to, but they're just cycling. And I love what you said, because it kind of does put something a little bit on all of us to say, hey, who's on your mind and your heart that you probably need to reach out to. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, and it's not necessarily just out of like, I don't want to know, but just maybe not being close to or in relationship with somebody who has struggled, whether it's brain health issues. I want to talk specifically right now about depression.
Mm.
um, I kind of want to, can you give us like a definition of that, as we're just kind of talking through? I'd like to kind of go through a recognition and being able to kind of see these things so we can walk along with people in a good way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, depression is a very common, but it is a serious mental illness that just negatively impacts how you feel, the way you think, and how you act in everyday life. And so it's serious, it's common, but fortunately, it's also very treatable. Um, but the challenge is a lot of mental illness. A lot of it is internal, so we don't see it. And again, I just mentioned earlier, like we can really make a lot of assumptions about people based upon what we see. And it's
Hmm.
really easy in our culture for people struggling with mental illness, people struggling with depression, to exhaust a lot of their energy trying to make it appear like they're okay and that there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong. And so, one of the challenges that we face when it comes to depression, when it comes to our American culture or the culture in the faith community, is to allow brokenness and vulnerability to be acceptable and not to moralize it as though it says
Hmm.
something about their character, what they are or are not doing in their lives, or their faith in God, faith and belief.
Hmm.
And so because we know it's so common that it transcends race, gender, age, socioeconomic status, those things can certainly kind of amplify a lot of our depressive symptoms and our feelings of worthlessness or loneliness. But
Hmm.
somebody can have a great, awesome life and be sitting there by themselves and wonder, like, I've been so blessed and gifted by God. Why do I feel so sad? Why do I feel so empty? And there's a good chance it has a lot to do with just sort of the wiring and their vulnerability towards depression. So
You just did a great job right there of why we have shifted even from using the terminology mental illness and going to brain health.
mhm,
Because a lot of times, I mean, we know mental illness carries a stigma. People most of the time are shamed because of it, so they don't feel like they can reach out for help. But if you realize, hey, my brain is an organ, and my brain can have things that can be treated. You said it. The one beautiful thing about depression is that it is treatable, and we need to help people say, hey, if I had a broken leg, I'm going to go to the doctor. And
yeah,
so if this organ, your brain, has something that's, you're recognizing your thoughts, your feelings, your actions just aren't right. We want to encourage those watching right now, that there's hope and there is help. And yes, we know that some places people maybe are still wrestling and trying to understand things. But if any place in the church, we need to be a people that values people and says, here's a place to come. Here's a place where you can not be judged about this or that, but really an opportunity to process these things and recognize that there's hope, regardless of what you're thinking and feeling right now. And so the way you unpacked that was really helpful. Um, how do we help? Specifically this time, you are home now, and maybe you're around family members, and you're beginning to recognize some things that seem a little bit off. I think that's one of the key indicators a lot of times with depression, is you watch your teenager begin to operate in a way that looks very different than how they would normally operate.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit, and go ahead and take a minute to kind of break it down? There's probably a difference with teenagers, kids, and even adults. But how do we recognize some of those things? So first, let's talk about recognition, and then maybe we can talk about, next steps.
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons that depression is so common is because it impacts our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. So there's a lot to look for. And somebody can really exhibit depressive features without them necessarily meeting a mental health criteria, a diagnosis of depression. But regardless of that, there's a number of things we want to look for, sleep or appetite disturbance, overwhelming bouts of emotionality, whether it be sadness, whether it be anger or irritability, starting to isolate and withdraw from people and things that they love. So it's not even just people. If somebody's really interested in sports or music or the arts, and you see them slowly either pulling away from them or commenting on how they're not getting the joy and pleasure out of it that they normally would do. Sometimes you just look for numbness where there's no emotionality, right? So some people have just sort of a roller coaster of emotions that seem like unpredictable and come out of nowhere. Other people start to really become flat and numb, and so they're not really feeling anything at all. You want to hear and look for statements of worthlessness, deep self-criticism. Those are the things that we kind of look for. And the other thing that a lot of times people need to be educated about, because it falls under a different sort of category of our being, but look for physical problems, physical ailments. A lot of times that's our body trying to warn us, trying to tell us that mentally, emotionally, psychologically, we're carrying a lot of pain or burden. And now it's coming out through physical problems.
What might some of those physical things be? I mean, you don't have to give me an idea, I guess.
Headaches, back pain, those are two of probably the most common symptoms that our mental well-being is really being disrupted, and it is struggling. When I'm stressed, and this is just a personal example, but when I'm stressed, my lower back tightens up and my neck tightens up. Okay. So one of the practices that I do every day, both in the morning and at night, is I stretch, and I just sort of see, like, how much am I carrying stress around? Because I know that through past experiences, if I go to bed without stretching, I'm not aware of how much discomfort I have, and it will disrupt my sleep. Mm-hmm. So your body is one of the ways that it tries to tell us how we're doing. Appetite disturbance, it's one of the ways our body's trying to tell us that something's wrong. We're struggling.
Pay attention to that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good. One of the things that I've recognized, and again, we have a toddler, so I'm not an expert at all in recognizing how to help a teenager or a kid or anything like that. But one of the things I recognized that I've appreciated over the years with my own parents was just the communication lines are open. Mm-hmm. And because I think sometimes our desire when we see something that may come along the lines of brain health is, how can I help alter this behavior? I'm not sure what to do with it, so I'm going to try to fix this. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about what it looks like to approach when you're seeing this. What's it look like to approach and really encourage somebody in that space, and not necessarily try to fix it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're great in the American culture that we want to fix things, and we want immediate results, immediate solution, instant gratification. But people don't like to feel like they're a project. And even when we want to help, if we try to offer unsolicited advice or tell people what would help and what they can do, it opens us up to feel very invalidated. Like, in some ways we feel like, well, that they're criticizing me because I'm not doing that. Or what happens if I do that, what they advise me to do, and it doesn't help? Is that saying something negative about me? Or it's hard to do that. Everyone says this is so simple, just do this, but it's not simple for me. And so we really do need to be mindful of not just what we do or what we say, but the messaging that might be received behind it. If somebody's already struggling with depression, if they're just emotionally, psychologically in a bad place, they really need validation and empathy. They really need to believe that they're not alone, that people care, and that there is hope. And, one of the ways that we do that is we really try to normalize it. Normalize that, hey, this is pretty common. It may feel so isolating and unique and exceptional in your own experience, but a lot of people struggle with this. That's one of the challenges of the stigma behind mental health, is that because we don't talk about it enough, most people don't realize how pervasive struggling with depression or anxiety truly is. So they feel like there's something unique about them and something defective about them that they're going through that, especially when a lot of people are able to look at their life and see the goodness in their life and the things that they appreciate and should be grateful for. And that sometimes makes it harder. Like, I shouldn't be sad. I shouldn't be struggling. I have such a good life. God has given me such a good life. But that just highlights that brain, that chemistry component. It's like, it's not about what we fill up our life, and it's not about only the things to our left and our right. Our brain has difficulty processing joy and meaning and hope in spite of all the blessings or good fortune that we've had. So we want to normalize it, but we also want to listen, really approach it out of curiosity. A lot of people struggle with, as an imperfect person, let's use me as an example. As an imperfect person, I can exaggerate. I have the capability to lie. I can, fall into hyperbole. And so a lot of times when people talk about they're struggling with depression, it's really common for people to question it simply because it's like, oh, well, I think they're also lazy, or they don't want to do this, or, they're looking for excuses. And in a lot of ways, instead of approaching it out of skepticism and criticism, really approach it through curiosity. Listen, help me understand what's going on. Find the language that they can understand and find validating. So, mental illness really does carry a lot of stigma around it. What I tend to work, language I use with a lot of the folks that I see, especially guys, is we'll kind of talk about your brain is just sensitive. Like it's really sensitive. So when I'm working with folks with an ADHD diagnosis, like, your brain is really sensitive to boredom and stimulation. Like, there's very little in between. When we talk about anxiety, oftentimes I'll say, man, your brain, it seems like it's really sensitive to threats and worry and fear. And so for depression, sometimes we'll use the language of, it seems like your brain is really sensitive to pain, to sadness, to disappointment. Like, it really gets to you in a very heavy way. And then it remains for a long period of time that we just don't know how to have that flush out of our system in a natural way that maybe somebody without that sensitive type of brain, it just naturally, kind of comes in and comes out of their life to where they have a setback, they have something really disappointing. It sets them back for a moment, but then they're able to move on in a way that maybe a depressed or sensitive brain can't. It can't move on. It gets stuck.
Yeah.
And you already talked about, don't try to fix it, simplify it, or minimize it. Don't question their feelings. Try to come at it from a place of acceptance and curiosity.
That's good. That's really helpful. The person that's at home right now, and they're listening, and they maybe feel like, I'm hearing some things. It's helping me realize I'm not the only one. Like, there are other folks who are processing some of the things that I'm processing, or feeling some of the things that I'm feeling. What would you tell them? Like, hey, here's what I would encourage you to do today.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I would encourage anybody that's struggling, and this resonates with them on some level, the first thing I would encourage you to do is think of who would be the person that maybe you'd feel most comfortable letting them know. Because when we are silent, you suffer alone. And then when you're silent, the only help and relief you have available is what you're capable of doing. And you're struggling. You need help. You need others. So that would be the first thing I would encourage for anyone listening and can relate to this. The second thing I would encourage anybody listening that maybe isn't struggling with depression, or they feel like, yeah, I have some setbacks and struggles, but I feel like I'm at that place where I'm able to tolerate them, I'm able to manage it, then I would really encourage you to pause and think about, is there anybody you know that has struggled in the past with loneliness, with depression, with mental health challenges? Is there anyone you know right now that's going through some tremendously stressful or difficult times right now? And if you think of somebody, I strongly encourage you to reach out to them. Don't wait for them to reach out to you. And when you reach out, come from a place of deep authenticity and care. So much of my life, I've just fallen into the pattern that most of us do. I ask someone like, how you doing? And I really just allow them to just sort of give their normal pleasantry back. And then we move on versus, no, really, I want to know, how are you doing? Because I know that you're under tremendous stress at work, that maybe your job is at risk. I know that you have a lot of loved ones that maybe their own health puts them at high risk. I know that you have a child that struggles academically, and now you're put in a position that you're having to be their homeschool teacher. Like, don't just accept that I'm okay, everything's fine, or, because if they came up in your mind, if you thought of them when I gave you that prompt, they came up in your mind for a reason, because you know that they have some type of experience of struggle, of worry, and so we really need to care and look out for one another. This is a tremendous time in our history where what we do doesn't just affect us, and we've really had to adapt our thinking to communal thinking. It's really about relationships. What I do when I'm out and about right now, it doesn't just affect me. And in a culture that we have prided ourselves in individual rights and just being really empowered individually, a lot of people are struggling. Like, how do I think about not just myself, but what I do impacts other people, whether it be economically, whether it be life and death.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of scary, but that's also a tremendous blessing and privilege to know that, like, what you do with your life can benefit others. And it is a huge responsibility. What you do with your life can negatively impact others right now. And we can't take that lightly.
No, we can't. And man, that was great. And I think you gave us a great spot to kind of wrap up. And man, the step, I just want to encourage everybody that's watching right now. You heard two key things. Is one, if this is a space that you're struggling, and it may not just be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be a host of things. I know I would sit in church sometimes, and the pastor would say, if you're dealing with this, like, okay, well, he didn't say what I was dealing with, so I don't need to respond today. I just want to encourage you out there. We have a care request card that's available online, and you all can click on that. And simply all you're doing is letting us know, and we're going to pray for you. But we also have some great resources that we can point you to be able to take a next step towards help. And that help might just look like, I just need somebody else to process some things with. It may be seeing a professional for a period of time to help relieve some of those sensitivities that maybe you're experiencing. But I just want to encourage you, God has not wired us to do this on our own. There are no Lone Rangers, and there are none of us who are supposed to just muster it up and get over it. He's given us the opportunity to serve one another well. And I love that you said that we do need to be thinking about others. And so I just want to encourage you today, if you're watching, that was Christ's example, to think about others' needs above our own. And at the same time, we also talked about loving ourselves. And we say that all the time, loving ourselves correctly. The theme of our Brain Health Awareness Month is love yourself. And so I think the first thing of loving yourself is just really looking and recognizing that God sees you. He sees you through the lens of his son, who lived an amazing life and a perfect life, who gave himself so that you and I could be in relationship with God. And so there's an invitation there. There's not a shaming. There's not a putting in the corner. There is not a, you get yourself straight and then come see me. He's made a way for us to seek out hope and help. And so I could probably keep talking about all of that, But I just want to say, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time. You gave us a ton to chew on. We'll have a conversation guide that is available, that'll be available on our website for you all to be able to get, that just allows you to continue this conversation. This could be an introduction maybe for you to say, hey, just heard this great talk. Check it out. I'd love to talk with you about it. Look for that trusted friend, that family member that you want to discuss it with, or maybe it's a small group or whatever. Just want you to have that opportunity to continue this conversation and know that we, your TC family, are here. And I say it again, Jonathan, thank you so much for this time. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis. I've enjoyed being a part of this.
Oh, thank you. All right, TC family. I hope y'all have an amazing evening. Thanks so much for being on here with us, and we'll see you again next week.